On January 14, 1843, in a dim, firelit cottage on the outskirts of Birmingham, England, a young couple named Thomas and Elena sat in complete silence, waiting for the last rustle and breath from the crowded room to fade as their family drifted into sleep. 11 people lived in that cramped, timber structure, with 2 small rooms struggling to contain parents, younger siblings, a widowed aunt, and 3 cousins, all sharing the same air, the same warmth, and the same space, leaving almost no moment in which a married couple could be alone. This scene was not uncommon. For most of human history, the idea of a couple enjoying private bedrooms or a locked door was a luxury reserved for the wealthy. From medieval peasants who slept beside livestock to Victorian labourers squeezed into urban tenements, ordinary people lived in environments where privacy was impossible, and yet marriages survived, children were born, affection endured, and relationships somehow thrived despite the absolute lack of personal space. To understand how intimacy existed in such conditions, we must first understand that privacy, as a concept, is relatively modern. In the medieval and early modern periods, families lived communally not because they preferred it, but because economic survival demanded it. In medieval Europe, most peasants lived in single-room hall houses where cooking, eating, working, and sleeping all happened in the same space. Straw mattresses were thrown on the floor at night, and everyone, parents, infants, older children, slept wherever a patch of ground was available. Chroniclers and social historians describe this world frankly. Intimacy happened quietly and discreetly, but it happened, and no one pretended otherwise. The early modern period saw bed furniture become more valuable, even symbolic. Yet families continued to share them, sometimes out of necessity and sometimes out of cultural tradition. Travelers' accounts from Germany, France, and England describe common bed-sharing traditions where guests and family members slept side by side for warmth. In the Victorian era, the rise of industrial cities made overcrowding worse. Tenements in London, Manchester, Glasgow, and New York often housed entire families in a single room. Social investigators like Henry May documented how common it was for multiple families to share beds or for curtains to serve as makeshift walls. In these conditions, children often became aware, by sound or by sight, of their parents' nighttime life, though Victorian society outwardly preached modesty. The contradiction was vast. Society expected couples to produce children, yet forbade speaking openly about intimacy, forcing couples to carve out private, unspoken moments within crowded environments. Couples relied on a system of mutual understanding, timing, and silent social rules. One of the most important of these rules was the unspoken agreement known today as tacit privacy, in which family members simply pretended not to notice when a married couple needed closeness. Children were told to face the other way. Older relatives buried themselves under blankets or stared into the hearth, and those awake pretended to sleep. In many cultures, this was not considered shameful, but rather a normal part of life. Alongside this, couples waited for late nights or early dawn, when others were half asleep, creating small windows of possibility within the rhythm of the household. Outdoor privacy was also common in rural societies. Barns, fields, sheds, and quiet corners of farmland provided discreet moments during evening chores. Even in slightly wealthier homes, where beds had heavy curtains, intimacy occurred behind fabric rather than behind walls. These bed hangings acted as early forms of personal chambers within communal rooms, used by nobles, merchants, and ordinary households alike. Queen Elizabeth I herself kept heavy bed curtains not only for warmth, but for privacy in rooms filled with attendants. Across the world, from Japanese longhouses to Russian izbas to South Asian joint families, the pattern was the same. Space was shared, life was shared, and privacy was a privilege almost no one possessed. Cultural expectations, however, ensured that couples found a way, because marriage was not merely romantic, It was vital to economic and social survival. A strong marital bond could determine whether a family farm thrived, whether children survived winter, whether a household maintained emotional stability amid hardship. Intimacy sustained these bonds. But intimacy also shaped society. The lack of private space influenced the development of modesty norms, family structures, and eventually housing reforms. The 19th and early 20th centuries saw the rise of building regulations and the architectural shift towards separate bedrooms, as reformers and doctors argued that overcrowding harmed health and damaged family relationships. Yet despite the challenges of living in a crowded home, love and connection persisted because humans have always adapted. Couples like Thomas and Elena did not wait for perfect conditions, for private bedrooms, or for locked doors. Instead, they relied on timing, quietness, mutual understanding, and the silent cooperation of everyone around them. Their situation, uncomfortable to modern eyes, reflects a universal truth across history. Intimacy is not dependent on architecture, but on the resilient, inventive human instinct to remain close to those we love, even in the most crowded and challenging spaces. To truly understand how couples managed intimacy while living shoulder to shoulder with their entire family, we must step inside the daily routines, unwritten rules, and lived realities of households across centuries, where the tightness of space shaped not only relationships but entire cultures. Imagine a medieval English cottage in the 1300s, made of wattle and daub, where the central hearth glowed day and night, warming not just the air but the lives of the 8 or 10 people who lived inside. In such a home, animals were often kept indoors during winter. Children slept in bundles for warmth, and the parents' bed, raised slightly above the floor, was rarely a private sanctuary. Yet the marriage within that cramped cottage was expected to function, produce children, and hold emotional stability for the household. The medieval mindset simply accepted that privacy was a luxury. People who lived hard lives had no expectation of personal space. The same was true across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. In Japan, communal longhouses housed dozens of people from the same clan. In Russia's izbas, families slept on or around the giant stove platform, often with 3 generations piled together. In South Asian joint families, newlyweds lived among parents, uncles, cousins, and siblings, sometimes sharing 1 or 2 rooms among 20 people. And yet marriages continued, love grew, and intimacy found its hidden paths. Part of this resilience comes from a powerful, though rarely discussed, anthropological truth. Humans do not require external privacy to feel internal closeness. They require cooperation. In communal societies, that cooperation came through subtle but universally recognized behaviors. One of these was the instinctive habit of looking away. In medieval England, children were taught early to turn toward the wall or shut their eyes when their parents needed a moment. In Scandinavian log houses, where everyone slept on benches around the fire, people wrapped themselves tightly in their blankets and pretended to be asleep while the married couple shared a quiet exchange just a few feet away. In Ottoman family compounds, relatives and servants moved silently to the courtyard to give the couple a brief window of separation. These small gestures, though simple, were vital for the dignity of a marriage. Another factor was timing. In a world without electricity, daylight shaped life. People rose with the sun and collapsed into sleep shortly after dusk. This created a surprisingly useful rhythm. Many couples waited until the house fell into deep slumber, when the crackling hearth, the soft breathing of sleeping children, and the stillness of night provided the only cover they needed. Others woke before dawn, taking advantage of the half-hour when the sky was pale but no one else had stirred. In farming societies, early chores such as fetching water, feeding animals, or gathering wood offered brief privacy outdoors. A quiet walk to the well or a shared moment in the barn provided the emotional and physical space unavailable inside the home. In Inuit communities where the entire family slept in close quarters inside snow houses or wooden huts, couples often used hunting trips or food, gathering journeys to reconnect privately. In West African compounds, couples slipped behind grain stores or into the outer courtyard before the day began. Physical intimacy was not the only thing sustained through these stolen moments. These were also opportunities for emotional connection, whispered conversations, shared laughter, and planning for the survival of the family. Beyond timing and cooperation, architecture itself, though simple, played a critical role in creating what little privacy existed. Medieval beds were not just places to sleep, they were micro-rooms. Heavy drapes hung from wooden frames, enclosing the sleeping space like a tiny tent. These curtains served multiple functions. They kept heat in, kept insects out, and most importantly, created a dim private cocoon even within a room full of people. In wealthier households throughout the Middle Ages and Renaissance, these curtains became more elaborate, embroidered with scenes or religious symbols, but their purpose remained the same. In less wealthy homes, families used thick wool blankets or rush mats to create makeshift partitions. Europeans from the 1005, hundreds to the 1008, hundreds frequently used screens, folding wooden panels, to divide space temporarily. Even in India's Havelis or the Middle East's courtyard houses, fabric screens were used by women for privacy during dressing, childbirth, or nightly routines, offering couples modest pockets of retreat. In cities during the Industrial Revolution, where families lived in suffocating tenements, couples adopted even more creative strategies. They might send younger siblings to run errands, fetch water, or visit neighbors to create a short window of quiet. Mothers might take children outside to play while the couple remained indoors. Sometimes intimacy even shifted outdoors into alleys, stairwells, or laundry courtyards, not out of choice, but out of necessity. These urban realities were recorded by social observers who were shocked at how little space the working class had but noted that relationships still persisted, proving that human closeness adapts to whatever environment it must survive in. Another major component in maintaining intimacy was cultural acceptance. Across history, societies did not treat marital intimacy as something shameful. It was a functional, expected part of life. People understood that families were crowded and that couples needed space, so they accommodated them silently. Children learned to ignore what they heard. Adults respected the unspoken boundaries, and couples used their ingenuity to carve out tenderness within chaos. Emotional intimacy also played a role. In communities where survival depended on cooperation, couples often communicated through simple gestures, a brief touch of the hand while kneading dough, a shared glance across a crowded table, or a quiet conversation by the fire when others stepped outside. These small acts strengthened relationships in ways that modern private bedrooms cannot fully replicate. Finally, it is important to understand that love grew differently in communal societies. Marriages were partnerships of survival, shared labor, and mutual dependence. Couples bonded through daily struggles, harvesting crops, carrying water, caring for livestock, feeding children, and enduring harsh winters together. Their connection was woven into the fabric of everyday life, not isolated in private rooms. In such a world, intimacy was not limited to nighttime whispers behind curtains. It lived in shared work, shared exhaustion, and shared hope. This deeper foundation allowed marriages to thrive even without physical privacy. And so, across continents and centuries, couples found meaningful ways to stay close in houses overflowing with people, noise, and responsibility. They turned necessity into routine, discomfort into understanding, and silence into respect. Their methods, though subtle, kept love alive in a world where privacy barely existed. proving that the human heart, when determined, does not need space to stay close. It only needs intention. As the centuries progressed and societies evolved, the ways couples found intimacy within overcrowded homes also shifted, influenced by changing economies, shifting cultural norms, and the gradual emergence of architecture designed for privacy. Yet even with these changes, the majority of humanity continued living in multi-generational households where private moments were still hard to secure, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries, when industrialization pushed millions into rapidly expanding cities where families were squeezed into narrow, poorly ventilated apartments. Thin walls and overworked parents, crying children, and constant noise, making intimacy not just a matter of affection, but a matter of ingenuity. In Victorian England, for example, the ideal of modesty was publicly preached with great seriousness, but privately, working class families simply had to manage as best they could, and so countless couples developed subtle signals to indicate when they needed time alone, such as blowing out the candle early, placing a particular object on the mantel, or stepping outside together under the pretext of fetching water or checking the animals. Many letters and diaries from the 19th century describe how grandparents or older siblings would deliberately stay outside longer during evening chores to give the newly married couple a brief chance at solitude, while others mention how families arranged sleeping orders so that parents occupied the warmest corner of the room behind a curtain or sheet, an arrangement understood by everyone without ever being spoken aloud. In South Asia, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean, where extended family structures dominated daily life, cultural traditions balanced the lack of physical privacy with strong community respect for marital relationships, with older women in the house often protecting the couple's time by organizing tasks so that younger family members were kept busy elsewhere. In Indian and Middle Eastern households, it was common for housewives to create moments of intentional distraction, such as sending children to buy herbs from the market or encouraging men to go to the rooftop or courtyard so the couple could have a moment inside. In China, the Kang bed stove was a raised heated platform shared by multiple family members throughout the night. Yet even there, couples relied on the rhythmic breathing of the sleeping household and the cover of quilts to stay connected, trusting that the collective culture of modest silence would shield them from embarrassment. In European rural life, barns, granaries, and stables were more than just agricultural structures. They were some of the only private places available, and many couples relied on the excuses of tending animals or checking stored grain to steal a moment away from watchful family eyes. In many farming diaries, husbands wrote about how going to milk the cow or fix a fence at dusk became a quiet shared ritual with their wives, a moment where affection and conversation returned after long days spent in the exhausting company of extended family. These practices reflected a deeper truth. That intimacy was woven into the rhythm of daily life rather than confined to nighttime, and couples often expressed closeness through shared labor, exchanged glances, strategic teamwork, and gentle touches disguised as ordinary movements. Even in aristocratic households, where separate rooms existed, privacy was limited due to servants constantly coming and going, and nobles often relied on elaborate bed hangings, locked antechambers, or late hours after court activities to secure moments alone, showing that even wealth did not guarantee complete solitude. The rise of industrial cities brought new challenges. Tenement buildings with shared hallways, communal toilets, and crowded communal yards offered almost no space where a couple could be alone, and so intimacy moved outdoors into rooftops, stairways, laundries, and alleys, hidden not by walls but by the anonymity of urban darkness, a pattern observed from Paris to New York to Lahore. Reformers of the 19th century were horrified by these conditions, and their reports led to the first housing regulations that insisted on separate rooms for families. But such improvements took decades to reach working-class populations. Meanwhile, couples depended on the cooperation of neighbors and relatives, just as much as on the internal dynamics of their own homes. Women often exchanged favors with other women in the building, such as watching each other's children for half an hour, so the couple upstairs could have a moment of peace. Men sometimes kept watch near stairwells or courtyards to prevent interruptions. Even in rural societies far from industrial cities, the need for creativity remained constant. In Eastern European villages, couples used the quiet space behind outdoor ovens or near wells. In West African communities, the shade of trees beyond the compound became private sanctuaries. In Latin America, where extended families lived in compound-style homes, older relatives frequently played an active role in protecting younger couples' privacy, understanding that a strong marriage strengthened the entire household. What stands out across all these examples is that couples did not wait for privacy to appear. They created it through cooperation, timing, subtle signals, and mutual understanding. Their intimacy grew not because they lived in comfortable houses, but because they adapted to whatever environment they had. They developed small rituals of affection, secret smiles during a crowded dinner, a brief hand touch while grinding grain, a whispered conversation while hanging laundry, moments modern couples might overlook, but which were crucial in maintaining emotional closeness. And even though the modern world now offers private bedrooms, locked doors, and soundproof walls, the emotional resilience and creative strategies of past couples reveal how deeply human relationships can thrive even when conditions seem impossible, illustrating that intimacy is ultimately less about physical space and more about human adaptability, cooperation, trust, and the quiet determination to remain connected no matter how crowded the world becomes. As the modern era approached and the 20th century dawned, the transformation of intimacy within crowded households entered a new phase shaped by shifting economies, evolving cultural values, and the gradual rise of private space. Yet even then, millions of families across the world continued living in multi-generational homes where finding a moment alone remained a daily challenge, proving that intimacy between couples is far more resilient and adaptive than physical architecture alone. In Europe and North America, the Industrial Revolution had sparked mass urbanization, drawing families into small apartments where parents, children, and even boarders shared only a few cramped rooms, continuing the long-standing tradition of tacit privacy where everyone simply pretended not to notice what they were not meant to see, while new social expectations around propriety slowly began reshaping how couples navigated their relationships. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, marriage manuals, church sermons, and women's magazines increasingly emphasized romantic companionship, emotional communication, and the concept of marital intimacy as a sacred bond rather than a mere biological or economic necessity, a shift that made privacy feel more important yet ironically harder to achieve for the working class. In New York's Lower East Side, Italian, Jewish, Polish, and Irish immigrants lived with 10 or more people per apartment, with flimsy curtains dividing rooms. Surveys from 1905 recorded how newlywed couples often slept behind laundry lines or tucked themselves into tiny corners of the kitchen after children fell asleep. In London, social investigators described how couples waited until the factory whistles signaled late evening, and whole streets fell into silence before daring to share moments of closeness. In South Asia, the tradition of joint families persisted, with newlyweds frequently moving into the groom's parents' home where privacy was minimal. Anthropologists documenting Punjabi, Bengali, and Tamil households throughout the early 20th century observed how older female relatives, especially mothers-in-law, played a crucial role in securing the couple's early privacy, sending younger siblings outside, creating distractions, or subtly managing household tasks to give the pair time to bond. In the Middle East and North Africa, courtyard homes offered a unique advantage, While sleeping quarters remained shared, the open courtyard became a quiet nighttime refuge for couples seeking connection beneath the sky, the cool air offering emotional intimacy in a way that crowded indoor rooms could not. In East Asia, traditional homes in China, Korea, and Japan still housed multiple generations under one roof, and couples relied heavily on routines and architecture. Sliding screens, wooden partitions, and carefully timed evening walks gave brief windows into private married life. As the concept of modern housing standards emerged, driven by reformers, feminist movements, medical researchers, and urban planners, the need for privacy began shaping building designs. Governments slowly introduced housing programs encouraging separate bedrooms and improved ventilation, and by mid-20th century, the nuclear family model became idealized in the West. But this shift was not universal. In Latin America, Africa, and South Asia, large multi-generational homes remained the norm, and couples continued practicing centuries old strategies for maintaining closeness in communal environments. Love had to flow quietly, through soft conversations while shelling beans, through shared glances during festivals, through brief moments behind doors left ajar, through night walks amid warm summer air. Even in the West, the idea that every couple had a private bedroom did not become widespread until after World War II, when suburban housing boomed and millions of families moved into single-family homes with multiple rooms. Only then did intimacy become truly shielded by architecture, with private bathrooms, separate bedrooms, and locked doors becoming standard. Yet the irony is that even as privacy increased, emotional intimacy sometimes weakened, because physical space alone does not guarantee connection. In contrast, pre-modern couples, living in crowded, noisy, chaotic homes, developed strong emotional bonds precisely because they had to work together constantly, communicate subtly, and protect the marriage while surrounded by family. They knew that intimacy was not confined to nighttime, but lived in everyday gestures, washing clothes together by the river, preparing meals side by side, sharing burdens during winter storms, and supporting each other through sickness, childbirth, loss, and migration. Their marriages were forged in the push and pull of communal life. This reveals a profound truth. Intimacy is not simply the result of isolation or privacy, but rather the product of intentionality, understanding, cooperation, and shared vulnerability. Across time, across geography, across culture, the essence of marital closeness survived because couples adapted. Whether behind medieval bed curtains or in Victorian tenements, whether inside South Asian joint homes or Latin American compounds, whether in Japanese longhouses or African huts, couples always found ways to carve out moments that were theirs and theirs alone, weaving their marriages into the tightly packed fabric of family life. The history of intimacy in crowded homes is ultimately the history of human resilience, creativity, and the unbreakable desire to love despite circumstances. And that is why, when we look back at centuries of communal living, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Couples did not wait for silence, privacy, or perfect conditions. They created their own world within whatever space they had, proving that love endures even when the walls around it are thin and the world outside is watching.